6:47 on a Tuesday morning. A black Escalade pulled into the gravel lot at Marsh & Sons Woodcraft and idled there for a full minute before the door opened. The woman who stepped out wore a blazer the color of slate and carried a single leather portfolio. She did not look at the hand-painted sign above the bay door. She looked at the building the way a person looks at something they have already decided to discard. The man inside heard the gravel. He had been at the bench since 5:15, running his hand along the grain of a black walnut slab, the way a doctor reads a pulse. He set the plane down and walked to the door. She introduced herself without extending her hand. Tessa Hargrove, Director of Property and Asset Disposition, Callaway Development Group. She said the company had purchased the Tillman Mill property 6 months ago, including the adjacent storage building where Callaway had been warehousing surplus architectural salvage. She needed to clear the building by end of month. She had a manifest of 43 items. Most of it was junk. She held out a single sheet of paper. He read it. His name was Garrett Pruitt. He was 41, with a daughter in 4th grade, and a shop that his father had built in 1987 and that he had kept running through 3 recessions, and 1 year he did not talk about with anyone. He had calluses in the same places his father had them. He read the manifest twice. Then he looked up. These aren't surplus items. Mr. Pruitt, our acquisitions team cataloged everything. What's listed there is what it is. Item 7 is a hand-cut mortise panel from the original Tillman Mill floor, pre-Civil War longleaf pine. Item 12 is a set of hand-forged drawer pulls that were made in this county. Item 19 is, Mr. Pruitt, she cut him clean. Callaway Development is prepared to offer you $800 to haul the lot. You empty the building, we don't have to pay for a dumpster. Everyone moves on. He folded the manifest once precisely and held it at his side. $800 plus tax. We'll have an agreement drafted by end of day. He looked past her at the storage building across the lot. He had grown up playing in that building. He had helped Tillman himself sort lumber in there when he was 11 years old. I'll take it, he said. She had expected a counteroffer. She got none. She slid the agreement across the hood of the Escalade. He signed it. She checked her phone twice while he was signing. Have it cleared by the 28th. She took the agreement back without looking at him. Thank you for your flexibility. Most people in this town make things unnecessarily complicated. She got in the Escalade. She did not look in the rearview mirror as she pulled out. He stood in the gravel and watched the vehicle reach the end of the road and disappear. Then he went back inside, picked up the plane, set it back down, and walked directly to his desk. He opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a folder that had not moved in 2 years. Inside was a letter from the Tennessee Historic Preservation Office, dated 2019. It was addressed to Garrett Pruitt, architectural salvage specialist. It had his certification number in the upper right corner. He had not told her. She had not asked. In 3 weeks she would understand why that mattered. His daughter's name was Ada. She was 9 with her mother's eyebrows and her father's habit of going quiet before she said something serious. She came to the shop after school on Tuesdays and sat on the high stool at the end of his bench, doing her reading homework while he worked. That afternoon, when he came in from the storage building with a piece of longleaf pine cradled in both arms like it was an injured animal, she looked up over her book. "What's that, old friend?" he said. She watched him lay it across the trestles. "It smells like the inside of Grandpa's closet. That's because Grandpa built his closet out of the same wood. He ran a cloth along the surface very slowly. A long time ago, before your grandpa was born, somebody cut this tree down and milled it into boards and built something that was supposed to last. And it did last. It lasted longer than the people who built it, and longer than their kids, and almost longer than their grandkids. And then somebody decided it was junk." Ada watched him work the cloth. "But it's not junk." "No," he said. "It is not junk." That evening, after Ada was asleep, he called the one number in his phone he had not called in 18 months. "Patrice, it's Garrett. I need you to come look at something in person." Patrice Odom arrived the next morning at 7 o'clock in a truck with a cracked windshield and 40 years of inventory stickers on the bumper. She had been the foremost architectural salvage dealer in the Mid-South for longer than Garrett had been alive, and she walked through the storage building the way a surgeon walks into an OR, quiet, deliberate, touching nothing until she had seen everything. She stood in front of item 7 for a long time. Then she looked at Garrett. Her voice was very level. "Who signed the disposal contract?" "Callaway Development." "Director named Hargrove. Does she know what this is?" "She knows what it costs to haul it." Patrice exhaled slow through her nose. This panel is likely the last intact example of the Tillman Mill's original flooring in private hands. The State Preservation Office has been trying to locate any surviving pieces for their documentation archive for 7 years. She turned. Item 12. Those pulls, I know. Do you know who made them? Same blacksmith who made the hardware in the Cumberland County Courthouse, 1847. Patrice closed her eyes for 1 second. And the company just gave you all of it. For $800, gave it to me to haul away. Garrett, I know. What are you going to do? He picked up the manifest from the workbench. He had already begun his own notations in pencil in the margins. Provenance notes, condition assessments, comparable auction records. His handwriting was small and careful. I'm going to restore every piece that can be restored, he said. The rest I'll document and stabilize. Everything gets cataloged to museum standard before a single item leaves this building. Patrice studied him for a long count. And then the work speaks for itself. She shook her head once. The way someone shakes their head when they are not disagreeing, only absorbing. All right, what do you need? Your eye on items 23 through 31, and your hands on the documentation for item 7. You've got them. That same afternoon, 40 minutes south in Nashville, Tessa Hargrove sat in a glass-walled conference room on the 18th floor reviewing the Tillman Mill acquisition summary. The numbers were clean. Demo was scheduled for the 7th. The municipal approval for the mixed-use development had come through faster than projected, mostly because of Darren Fisk, the company's VP of Community Relations, who had managed the zoning board with a particular kind of efficiency Tessa had stopped asking questions about. She closed the summary and turned to the window. Below, the Cumberland River moved gray, and even in the November light, she had grown up in this city. Her father had driven her past the Tillman Mill when she was 8 years old, telling her that buildings like that were how you knew a place had a history worth keeping. She had not thought about that in a long time. She turned back to her desk and opened the Whitmore project file. There was always another project. At Pruitt Woodcraft, Ada brought 2 mugs of hot cider out to the storage building on Wednesday evening. She handed one to Patrice, who crouched to Ada's height and asked if she knew what kind of tree made longleaf pine. Ada said, "A longleaf pine tree." Patrice laughed so suddenly it startled both of them. Garrett, at the bench with a soft brush cleaning 40 years of grime from item 12, heard the laugh and did not look up, but something in his shoulders dropped that had not dropped in a long time. By the end of the first week, he and Patrice had completed condition assessments on all 43 items. 12 were restorable to full integrity. 11 were fragmentary but documentable. The remaining 20 had enough provenance value to warrant museum-quality stabilization. Not one of them was junk. On Friday, Tessa's assistant called. Miss Hargrove wanted confirmation that the building would be cleared by the 28th. Garrett confirmed it would. He did not say what cleared meant to him. The following Tuesday, Tessa drove up from Nashville herself. She did not call ahead. She had a second agreement she needed Garrett to sign, an additional liability waiver standard for demolition-adjacent sites. Her company counsel had flagged it as missing from the original paperwork. She walked into the shop at 9:15. The main bay was empty. She followed the sound of a belt sander to the back room. He was working on item 7, flat on the restoration table, the longleaf pine panel lit from above by 2 daylight bulbs on adjustable arms. The grain ran in long, unbroken lines, the color of old honey. She stopped in the doorway. He set the sander down and looked at her. He did not appear surprised. He wiped his hands on a clean cloth. "Messrs. Hargrove, Mr. Pruitt, I need one more signature." She set the portfolio on the end of the table, away from the panel. She glanced at the wood. "Is that item 7 from your manifest?" he said. She looked at it for a moment. Something moved across her face that she closed down quickly. "Of course, may I?" She gestured toward the portfolio. He nodded. She laid out the waiver. He read it in full. He read it twice. She stood with the patience of someone who had learned in her career that impatience cost more than time. He signed in 3 places. As she gathered the pages back into the portfolio, she let her eyes move across the room. The items were organized on padded trestles, each tagged with a small numbered card in Garrett's handwriting. A reference binder sat open on the corner desk, tabbed with colored markers. A preservation lamp on a stand, a humidity gauge on the wall. She looked at all of it. Then she looked at him. "What exactly are you doing in here?" "Clearing the building," he said, as agreed. She held his gaze for a moment. He did not elaborate. She walked back through the main shop and out to her car. She sat in it for 2 minutes without starting the engine. Through the shop window she could see the glow of the daylight bulbs from the back room. She started the car and pulled out. Halfway back to Nashville she called her personal attorney, not her company counsel. She asked about architectural salvage law in Tennessee, about what obligations a property developer had when disposing of items that might carry historical designation, about what happened if they didn't. Her attorney said it depended on several things. He said the word exposure. She did not sleep well that night. The next morning she pulled the Tillman Mill acquisition file and read it again, this time more carefully. Item 7 was listed on the manifest as damaged flooring scrap, no salvage value. That notation had been added by Darren Fisk's division. So had items 12, 19, and 24. All 4 of those items had been assessed by Patrice Odom 4 days ago at a combined fair market value of between $60,000 and $90,000. Fisk had been with Callaway for 6 years. He had handled salvage disposals for 11 projects. She opened the folder for the Hendricks Warehouse Project, 2021. She found the disposal manifest. There was a notation in the same format, the same font, the same phrasing. No salvage value. She found the name of the disposal contractor. It was not a woodcraft shop. It was a Shell LLC registered in Georgia. She opened the folder for the Deacon's Mill Project, 2020. Same notation, different Shell LLC, different state. Her hand was steady on the mouse. Her breath was not. She closed both folders. She did not move them to the archive. She put them in the locked lower drawer of her own desk. Then she called her assistant and asked for a list of every disposal contract Fisk's division had originated in the last 8 years. Ada came to the shop that Tuesday with a library book on Tennessee history. She had found a photograph on page 47, a photograph of the interior of the Tillman Mill taken in 1932. You could see the floor. You could see the grain of the boards in long, unbroken lines. She showed it to her father. He looked at the photograph for a long time without speaking. "Dad," she said, "the floor in this picture looks like the wood in the back room." "It does," he said. "Are they the same?" He looked at her. "Yes, sweetheart, they're the same." She touched the photograph carefully, the way he had taught her to touch old things. "Then somebody has to keep it." "Somebody is," he said. She leaned against his arm. The lamp on the bench threw a yellow circle around the two of them and the open page of the book. The third week Tessa came back to the shop without an agenda. She did not have paperwork. She did not call ahead. She simply drove up from Nashville on a Wednesday afternoon and walked in. Garrett was at the main bench, fitting a set of hand-forged pulls back onto a drawer front that had warped and needed to be trued before they would seat properly. Item 12. He was working a plane across the edge in long passes. She stood inside the door and watched him work. He did not stop. After a while, she said, "Those were in the manifest as scrap hardware, I know." "They're not scrap hardware." "No," he said. She walked to the end of the bench. She did not touch anything. She looked at the pulls, at the iron, at the way the surface caught the light, and she was quiet for long enough that he glanced up. Her face had changed from the first time she had come to the shop. Something in it was less arranged, she said. "I found something in our project files," she said. "I'd like to understand it before I do anything with it. I can't ask anyone at the company." He set the plane down. He looked at her. "What did you find?" "A pattern," she said, "in the salvage disposals. 8 years, at least 6 projects." She set both hands flat on the workbench. The items being marked no salvage value, they were not mistakes. He was quiet. "Fisk," she said. "I think he's been selling them. Privately, without the company's knowledge. Or yours. Or mine." She looked at him directly. "You knew who I was when I came here the first time. I knew who you represented. You knew this building. You knew what was in it. I grew up here." She looked at him for a long count. "You could have told me what these items were worth. I could have. Why didn't you?" He picked up the plane again. He turned it in his hands. "Because you came here with a number and a deadline. Telling you what I knew wouldn't have saved anything. It would have started a conversation that ended in lawyers. The work needed to happen first." He set it back down. "And because these pieces deserve to be restored whether you believed me or not." She was silent. The shop was quiet except for the low sound of the humidity unit running in the back room. She left without asking anything else. She sat in her car at the end of the lot for 4 minutes. Then she pulled out and drove south. Ada came in from school at 3:45 that afternoon. She set her backpack on the stool. She looked toward the back room, then at her father. Was she here again? She was. Ada considered this. She looked sad. "People look sad when they're figuring something out," he said. Ada picked up her book and climbed onto the stool. After a while she said, without looking up, I think she's trying to be good. He did not answer. He looked at his daughter for a moment. Then he went back to the drawer front. Tessa drove back to Nashville and went directly to her apartment. She had not been eating properly. She had not been sleeping more than 5 hours. She sat at her kitchen table with the Fisk files printed and spread across the surface, and she went through them page by page with a highlighter and a legal pad. The number grew. By her count, Darren Fisk had originated false, no salvage value notations on items across 11 projects since 2016. She could trace 9 disposal contracts to shell entities. She could not yet trace where the items had gone after that, but she knew someone who probably could. She also found something else. In the Tillman Mill acquisition folder, buried in the pre-purchase due diligence materials, was a 7-page heritage assessment commissioned by the previous owner and completed in 2021. It had been flagged as received by Fisk's division on the date it arrived. It had been marked reviewed. It had never been forwarded to acquisitions, to legal, or to her. The assessment named 12 items in the storage building as eligible for Tennessee Historic designation. Item 7 was listed first. She had bought a property carrying a potential heritage restriction and she had not been told. She had then attempted to dispose of the restricted items for $800. She sat very still at the kitchen table for a long time. Then she picked up her phone. She did not call Fisk. She did not call company counsel. She called her personal attorney and asked him to meet her first thing in the morning. And then she looked up the number for Garrett Pruitt and sat with her phone in her hand for a while before she called it. He answered on the 3rd ring. She could hear Ada's voice in the background. Something about a math problem. She said, "Mr. Pruitt, I think I owe you something more than $800. He said nothing for a moment. Then, have you looked at the heritage assessment? Yes. All 7 pages? Yes. Then you already know what you owe. He paused. Not to me. She did not sleep well again that night, but it was a different kind of sleepless. Not the unsettled kind, but the kind that comes when a person has finally named a thing and is beginning to understand its weight. By the start of the 4th week, the first 2 items were fully restored. Item 12, the drawer pulls, had been cleaned, stabilized, and documented with a full provenance report cross-referencing the Cumberland County Courthouse records. Item 19, a hand-thrown pottery drainage collar original to the mill's 1851 expansion, had been photographed from 32 angles and written up by Patrice in a report that ran to 11 pages. The Tennessee Historic Preservation Office had been notified. Their field officer, a man named Raymond Burkett, who had been trying to locate surviving Tillman Mill materials for the better part of a decade, drove up from Nashville on a Thursday morning and stood in Garrett's back room for 40 minutes without saying much. When he left, he shook Garrett's hand and said the word remarkable 4 times. On Monday of the 4th week, Tessa came back with a wooden crate on the back seat of her car. She carried it into the shop herself. She set it on the bench. Inside were 2 things, a folder of documents and a framed photograph. The photograph was of her father. He was standing in the Tillman Mill, she said, in 1987. She had found it in a box in her apartment that she had moved 3 times without opening. Her father had been a preservationist, a small one. He worked for the county, not for any institution, and most people had not known what he did. He had written the first structural survey of the Tillman Mill in 1989. She had not known this until she read the folder. The folder was a copy of his survey, found in a state archive database she had accessed at midnight the previous Thursday. After her attorney left, she set it open on the bench beside item 7. The survey mentioned the original mill flooring specifically. It used the word irreplaceable. Her father had written that word, and then she had almost paid $800 to have it hauled to a landfill. She set her hand on the edge of the bench. She did not cry, but the steadiness it took not to was visible. Garrett looked at the survey. He read the name at the bottom. Then he looked at her. "Your father did good work," he said. "This survey was part of why the Preservation Office kept the file open." She looked at him. "You knew about this survey. I found it in the state archive 2 years ago. I'd been trying to locate these mirrors through private channels ever since, and when Callaway bought the property, I found out 3 days after your acquisition closed, and you signed an $800 disposal contract. The materials needed to be moved. The building needed to be cleared. The legal path would have taken 8 months, and the demolition was already scheduled." He set the survey down. "Your company made a mistake. Fisk made it worse, on purpose. I didn't think putting an injunction on your project was going to save anything. I thought saving the materials was going to save the materials. She was quiet for a long time. Why didn't you tell me about my father's survey when I came here the first time? Because you came here as a director with a manifest and a deadline. You didn't come as his daughter. He paused. People have to arrive at their own reasons. Something went still in her face. Not blank, still, the way a surface goes still when the wind stops. She picked up her father's survey and held it. She turned the pages slowly. When she reached the page with the mill floor description, she stopped. She read it once. Then she set it back down, precisely, beside item 7. I'm going to the board, she said. The full Fisk file, everything, I know. It's going to be complicated. It usually is. He's been with the company longer than I have. He has friends on the board. I imagine he does. Garrett looked at her without moving. That's usually how this kind of thing works. She picked up the survey and tucked it back into the folder. I'm going to need the documentation you've built here. Everything. The provenance reports, the condition assessments, Patrice Odom's reports, official and complete. She hesitated. Would you be willing to present it? In person. To the board. He looked at her for a moment. Yes. She nodded once. She closed the crate. She picked it up herself. Ada came in from the back room with a cup of tea and set it on the bench near Tessa's hand. She did this without saying anything first, which was more like her father than she knew. Tessa looked at the cup, then at Ada. Thank you. Dad says tea is for when things are serious, Ada said. Things are serious, Tessa said. Ada nodded, satisfied, and went back to her book. On Wednesday of the 5th week, item 7 went onto the documentation table for its final assessment. Garrett had spent 40 hours on it over 3 weeks. He had restabilized 3 sections where the wood had begun to separate along the grain, replaced 3 missing pegs with hand-cut reproductions from period-appropriate longleaf stock, and built a custom cradle of white oak and felt for transport and storage. Patrice stood at the end of the table and looked at it for a long time. You know what Hargrove's company could have had if Fisk hadn't been skimming these items for years? A reputation, Garrett said. More than that. A brand. There are developers in this city who would pay significant money to have their projects associated with the preservation work you just did on this piece alone. Garrett looked at the panel. He ran one hand along the grain very lightly. I know. Are you going to tell her that? She'll figure it out, he said. She's already figuring it out. Patrice looked at him with the particular expression she had been using on him since he was 23 years old and making avoidable mistakes. Are you sure that's the only reason you're not telling her? He did not answer. He picked up the provenance report and wrote the final entry in the margin. That Friday, Fisk came to Tessa's office with 2 of his attorneys and a preemptive counter-narrative that had clearly been prepared over several days. He laid it on her desk. He leaned forward. He spoke with the controlled assurance of someone who had managed his way out of difficult rooms before. She let him finish. Then she opened her desk drawer and removed a folder. She set it in front of him. The first page was a wire transfer record from a Delaware shell entity dated November 2019. The items listed on the corresponding disposal manifest matched items from the Hendricks Warehouse project, verified against Patrice Odom's retroactive assessment. By the 3rd page, his attorneys were exchanging looks. By the 7th, Fisk's hand was no longer steady. She pressed the intercom. She asked security to escort Mr. Fisk and his associates out of the building. She used the word permanently. She sat in her office for a few minutes after they left. She did not move the folder. She looked out the window at the river. Then she picked up the phone and called Raymond Burkett at the Historic Preservation Office and told him she wanted to talk about what Callaway Development could do that would be worth talking about. On the Monday after, Tessa walked into the Callaway boardroom with a prepared presentation and Garrett beside her. He wore a flannel-lined canvas jacket. He did not apologize for it. There were 8 board members. 3 of them had been with the company long enough to remember when Darren Fisk was hired. Tessa laid out the evidence in 38 minutes. She did not raise her voice. The false disposal notations, the shell entities, the 9 transactions she had been able to trace, the estimated asset value removed from company projects without authorization, which her forensic accountant had placed at between $4 and $6 million over 8 years. The heritage assessment Fisk had suppressed on the Tillman Mill acquisition. The liability exposure the company had incurred, unknowingly as a result. She laid out the preservation documentation Garrett had built. She laid out Patrice Odom's reports. She laid out Raymond Burkett's letter from the preservation office. The room was quiet. One of the older board members asked about the Tillman Mill items specifically, their current status, their assessed value, their disposition. Tessa said the 12 items eligible for historic designation had been fully stabilized and documented and were being transferred to a partnership between the State Archive and a private conservancy. The fair market value of the items, assessed by Patrice Odom and confirmed independently, was approximately $114,000. Callaway Development had disposed of those items under false notation for $800. The room was quiet for a longer time. The same board member asked who had done the restoration work. Tessa nodded toward Garrett. She said, "This man, a third-generation woodworker and certified architectural salvage specialist whose family has been in this county for 60 years. Callaway Development gave him a disposal contract and expected him to take these pieces to a landfill. He spent 6 weeks restoring them instead." Another board member said he wasn't obligated to do that. "No," Tessa said. He wasn't. The board voted unanimously to refer the Fisk matter to outside counsel and to the DA's office. They voted to engage Callaway's own legal team on the heritage designation liability. And then, before the meeting adjourned, one of the older members, a woman who had known the company's founder and had sat on the board for 22 years, asked Tessa what she intended to do differently. Tessa said she intended to build a preservation partnership into every acquisition where heritage materials were present. She said she had been talking with the State Preservation Office about a memorandum of understanding. She said she wanted Garrett Pruitt's firm contracted as the company's salvage assessments partner on applicable projects going forward. The room was quiet again. Then the same woman said, "That's a good answer." After the meeting, Garrett and Tessa walked to the parking garage. The afternoon light came in at a low angle through the open levels and fell in long bars across the painted lines. "You didn't tell me you were going to propose the contract," he said. "I didn't decide until last night. What changed your mind?" She thought about it. "Ada's tea," she said. He looked at her. "She brought it over without asking if I wanted it. She just thought I needed it, and she was right, and she acted on that." Tessa stopped beside her car. "I've spent 8 years in a company culture where nobody did anything they weren't explicitly authorized to do. And you spent 6 weeks restoring things nobody authorized you to restore because they were worth restoring, and a 9-year-old brought tea because someone looked like they needed it." She looked at him. "I've been thinking about what that means for how I've been running my division." He was quiet for a moment. "Ada will be pleased. Please don't tell her it was her. She'll be insufferable." He almost smiled. It was the first time she had seen it. She drove back to her office. He drove the 40 minutes home. That night, in the back room of the shop, Ada looked up from her homework. "Dad, is Miss Hargrove going to come back?" He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "She might, Peanut. I hope she does," Ada said. She turned back to her book. She looked at item 7 the right way, like it mattered. He sat down beside her. The lamp on the bench was the same lamp that had been in his father's shop, the same one that had been on when he was Ada's age doing his own homework at this same surface. He did not say anything. He put his hand on top of Ada's hand for a second. Outside, the November dark had settled in early over the ridge, and the shop windows threw warm yellow squares onto the gravel. December moved in cold and clear over the Tennessee hills. Tessa rented a house in the county for the weeks when she was working with Raymond Burkett on the memorandum, rather than driving back and forth to Nashville every night. A small house with original plank flooring she recognized immediately and handled with the particular care of someone who had recently learned how to look. She spent Tuesday mornings at the preservation office going through the protocol line by line. She spent Friday afternoons at Garrett's shop going through project files the same way. They worked at opposite ends of the bench with coffee growing cold between them, and the conversation was mostly about work, which was something they were both good at, and was not only about work, which was something neither of them said directly. Ada taught her how to use a hand plane. This took 3 sessions and produced more wood shavings than practical results, but on the 4th attempt, Tessa took a pass the full length of a test board, and the surface came off glass smooth. Ada said gravely, "That's a real pass, Miss Hargrove." Garrett at the far end of the bench looked up. He said nothing. He went back to what he was doing. In January, Fisk was indicted on 6 counts. His assets were frozen. The press release was managed carefully and went out on a Thursday morning, drafted in large part by Tessa herself. She had not enjoyed writing it, but she had written it precisely, because precision was what the moment required. On the Saturday after the indictment, Garrett took Ada and Tessa to the Tillman Mill site. The building Calloway was developing was on the east end of the property. The storage building, the one Garrett had cleared, was on the west end, and the company had agreed, as part of the Heritage Partnership, not to demolish it. It would be repurposed. Raymond Burkett had ideas. The county had ideas. Tessa had a few of her own that she had not yet said out loud. They stood in front of the storage building in the January cold. Ada had her hands in her pockets. Tessa had her collar turned up. Garrett stood with his hands at his sides in the way he stood when he was not doing anything but was fully present. Ada said, "This is where it started." "It is," Garrett said. She looked up at the building. "This is where you decided." "I always knew what I was going to do with them," he said, "as soon as I saw the manifest." Ada considered this. Then she looked at Tessa. "He didn't tell you right away." "No," Tessa said. "He does that," Ada said, not unkindly. "He waits until you're ready to hear it." Tessa looked at Garrett. He was looking at the building. "Mostly," he said. The three of them stood there for a while. The cold was clean and quiet. A crow moved somewhere in the trees at the property line and went still again. In February, Item 7 was formally accepted into the State Archives' permanent collection. Garrett drove down with Ada and Patrice for the acceptance event. It was a small affair, 12 people in a room in a building that smelled like old paper, which Ada said was her favorite smell. Tessa was already there when they arrived. She had not said she was coming. She was standing near the panel, which was mounted now on a custom display bracket Garrett had built in his shop over 2 weekends. She was reading the provenance card. It listed the item's history. It listed the survey by her father. It listed the restoration by Garrett Pruitt, Certified Architectural Salvage Specialist, Pruitt Woodcraft, 2024. She heard him come in. She did not turn. He came and stood beside her. "Not close, not far. You didn't have to build the mount yourself," she said. "It needed to be right." She looked at the panel. "Your name is on the provenance card. It belongs there. So does my father's." "Yes," he said. "It does." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "When you found his survey in the archive, 2 years ago, yes, you knew who I was before I walked through your door. I knew who your father was. I didn't know who you were yet." She looked at him then. The light in the room was even and cool, archival light, the kind designed to protect old things. "And now?" He looked at the panel, then at her. He did not answer in words. He didn't need to. Ada appeared at Garrett's elbow with a cup of coffee from the table in the corner. She handed it to Tessa. "You looked like you might need this," Ada said. Tessa took the cup. Ada looked between the two of them with the calm appraisal of someone 9 years old who has been paying attention, and said nothing further, and went to find Patrice. Tessa held the coffee in both hands and looked at the panel, her father's floor, her father's words on the card beside it, her father's name above Garrett's in a record that would outlast all of them. And she did not say thank you because it was too small, and she did not say anything else because nothing else was needed. Outside, the February light was thin and pale and long. Ada was already at the window, watching a pigeon walk the ledge with great personal confidence, narrating it under her breath to Patrice, who was listening with complete seriousness. Garrett stood beside Tessa and did not speak. She stood beside him and did not move away. Some things do not need to be said to be understood. Some things hold their shape longest when you let them rest, in the quiet, the way good wood holds its grain, year after year, long after the tree is gone.